I want to tell you the truth about getting older as a man. Not the version that's meant to reassure you, and not the version that's meant to frighten you. The honest version. Just the honest version. The one that holds both the difficulty and the unexpected things. The things nobody prepared you for. That turn out to be genuinely good. The first truth is the one everyone mentions, but nobody really helps you feel in advance. And it is that things end. Things end. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the version of yourself that was young, that had the particular energy of youth, the physical ease, the sense of open horizon. That version doesn't stay. You feel it first in small ways. The recovery that takes longer. The mornings that require more. And the body that speaks more frequently and less politely than it used to. And underneath those physical signs, those signals, is something harder to name. The awareness that the inventory of firsts, first loves, first experiences, first arrivals, that inventory of firsts is gradually becoming an inventory of lasts. The last time you will be this age, the last time certain people will be exactly as they are right now, and the last time this particular version of your life exists. And sitting with that, I mean really sitting with it, is one of the harder things getting older asks of a man. But here is what I want to say about that difficulty. It's real. And it's not the whole truth. Because alongside everything that ends, alongside the losses and the limitations and the changed relationship with time, something else happens. Something the culture almost never talk about. A man who is aging honestly, who isn't suppressing what's changing or pretending it isn't, often finds that getting older gives him something he didn't have access to when he was young. Permission. The quiet, accumulating permission to stop performing the things he was never quite convinced by anyway. To stop pretending certainty he doesn't have. To stop maintaining the image that costs more than it returns. And to stop measuring himself against standards that were never really his. That permission, earned through years of living, is not a small thing. It's not a small thing at all. It's actually one of the most clarifying things that can happen to a man. But here is the strange part. Most men resist the permission. Even when they've carried the performance for decades, even when they're exhausted by the maintenance of the image. They resist the release. Because the performance became identity. And releasing the performance feels like losing the self. But most men misunderstand this completely. Because what actually happens for men who let it happen is the opposite. When the performance drops, the self doesn't disappear. It arrives. It actually, finally, arrives. The actual self. The one that was always underneath and was patient. A little weathered, but considerably more honest. And that self, the one that stops needing approval in quite the same way, that stops organizing itself around what's impressive, that has, I would say that man now has an accumulated confidence. Now he has the accumulated confidence of a man who has actually lived. And that self is more interesting than the performing version ever was. Yes, that man is more interesting than the performing version ever was. Because that man is more capable of genuine connection, more able also to be moved by things, and more honest in ways that other people can actually feel. Getting older, when it goes well, is the slow emergence of that self. And here is something I've come to understand that I don't think gets said enough. The things that are hard about getting older are mostly the things that were never sustainable anyway. The physical invincibility, the open horizon, the sense that there's always more time to begin, more time to change, to become something different. Those things were always temporary. They were always going to end. The question was when. And here is what's interesting about losing them. The loss clarifies. When the sense of unlimited time goes, when a man genuinely feels the finitude of his own life, something sharpens. The trivial becomes easier to identify, and the essential becomes harder to ignore. The petty grievances that once consumed the real energy, the social performances that cost more than they were worth, the version of success that was borrowed from someone else's playbook, they are now easier to set down. Not because a man gives up, but because he finally has enough experience to know what's worth carrying and what was only ever ballast. And this is where things become interesting. Because that clarity, the clarity of a man who has lived enough to understand what actually matters now, is not available to the young. It's earned. And slowly, through the accumulation of experience and loss. Yes, through loss. And through honest examination, self-examination. And it's one of the most valuable things getting older produces. And something changes after 40 and after 50 in the quality of men's relationships. Because when you were younger, relationships often serve a purpose. There is the social positioning. There is the professional advancement. The validation of being seen with certain people or in certain places, in certain circles. That was not cynically. It was just as a part of how the young self figures out where he stands in the world, right? I'm sure you can relate to this. But if you are now in your 40s, in your 50s, after 40, after 50, something changes, something shifts. The transactional quality of many relationships now starts to feel hollow. And the man finds himself gravitating toward something different, toward the people who actually know him. Actually know him. Him, not the performance, not the credentials, not the useful version. The people in front of whom he doesn't have to manage himself. And those relationships, fewer, deeper, more honestly chosen, become more precious with every year. Most men never notice this shift as it's happening. They just find themselves less interested, let's say less interested in the wide circle and more interested in the small one. Less drawn to being impressive to many and more drawn to being real with a few. That's not isolation. That's a man learning the difference between connection and company. And here is the truth about getting older that I find most surprising. And I think for a lot of men it will be surprising. The emotional range expands. Not in the direction most men expected. Not toward the numbness or hardening or the armor getting thicker. In the opposite direction. Men who age honestly, who allow the experience of getting older to do what it does, often find themselves more easily moved than they were at 30. By beauty, by grief, by ordinary love, by the specific quality of a particular afternoon that would have passed unnoticed 10 years ago. The capacity to be affected, which the young man suppressed because it felt like weakness. That capacity returns. And with it comes something that is genuinely hard to describe, but many men, I'm sure, recognize when it's named. And that is a kind of aliveness. Not the sharp, driven aliveness of ambition. I'm talking about something quieter, more saturated. The aliveness of a man who has stopped moving fast enough to actually feel the texture of where he is. And this unexpected expansion of feeling is one of the best kept secrets about getting older. That the man you become, if you let yourself become him, is capable of more depth and more genuine presence than the younger version could have managed. So let me ask you something. What has getting older given you that you didn't expect? Not taken, given. Because I think most men, when they're honest, have something in that column. Something that arrived not despite the years, but because of them. A patience you didn't have at 30. A clarity about what matters that youth couldn't have produced. A capacity for honesty with yourself, with others, that required a certain amount of living to develop. Maybe a freedom from the need to be impressive that feels gradually like one of the genuine gifts of this decade. Maybe a relationship that deepened precisely because both people in it stopped performing and started actually showing up. Maybe you felt this too. The quiet surprise of discovering that getting older is producing something you didn't know to hope for. That alongside everything that ends, and things do end, and that's real. But alongside those things that end, something is also arriving. Something that is, in its quiet way, worth arriving. The truth about getting older as a man is that it contains more than the culture says it does. More loss than the optimistic version admits. And more gift than the anxious version allows. Both are real. Both deserve to be held honestly. The man who only mourns what aging takes misses what it offers. The man who only celebrates what it offers is not being honest about what it costs. The full truth is somewhere in between. A man standing in the middle of his life, who has lost enough to know that loss is real, and who has lived enough to know that what remains can be more essential, more chosen, more genuinely his than what was there before. That's not a consolation prize. That's the actual thing. The version of himself that had to be earned through the accumulation of all the years, the difficult ones, the managed ones, the ones that where he was barely present, yes, and the ones where he finally was fully present. and all of it producing this. A man who, if he lets himself be a man more fully himself than he has ever been. I don't think getting older is the enemy. This is the point of this video. I used to, in some quiet way, I used to think that getting older is the enemy. The resistance to what was changing, and the nostalgia for the version of myself that felt more open. But I've come to understand it differently now. Getting older is the price of having lived, and the life, the actual, irreplaceable, full of difficulty and beauty life, is worth the price. It's worth the price you've paid, I've paid. Not because it's easy, because it's real, because it belongs to no one else, because it has been shaped by everything I have experienced, and everything I have chosen, and everything I have slowly learned. And that specific, hard-won, fully inhabited life is the only kind worth living.